Good morning, my amazing students. All right, today we're still in 5-7, but as you know, this is part B, and we're going to be covering slopes of perpendicular lines. So what I need you to do is hit pause right now and copy this stuff down. All right, so now that you have this copied down, let's take a look at our definition. So, what is perpendicular lines? They are two lines. We got two lines that intersect. So these ones actually cross over at 90-degree angles and have opposite reciprocals. Well, this is what a 90-degree angle looks like. It's when two things perfectly pass over one another. So basically right here in our little diagram, there's our intersection at a 90-degree angle. That's what that little square means. So basically it does the same thing that the x and the y-axis do. When they cross over, they cross at a 90-degree angle. But they also have these things called, remember, we're all talking about slopes, they have what we call opposite reciprocals. And we're going over that in just a moment. So make sure again that you have all this copied down. Well, if we do not know what opposite reciprocals are, then this becomes very difficult. So I've created a table with some numbers, and then I will demonstrate what their opposite reciprocals are. So copy this down right now. I'm going to pause it so that you can do that. All right, now that you have our examples written down, let's see what is an opposite reciprocal. Well, opposite is referring to the sign. So if I have a -3, my opposite is going to be positive, right? So we won't have a problem with positive, but we might need a refresher on what is a reciprocal. Well, a reciprocal is a number that's been flipped, right? So if we have a 3, remember that 3 kind of looks like a 3/1, right? So that's almost like a -3/1. But what is the reciprocal? So the reciprocal is going to be 1/3. And again, we said opposite. So what's the opposite of negative? Positive. So this is a positive 1/3. So again, looking at number 2 you can put on top of a 1, right? So we can literally go 2/1. But what is the opposite? So, well, this time the opposite, since it's positive, we're going to make it negative. So we're going to make it negative, and we flip this, and it becomes 1/2. Hopefully you're seeing a little bit of a pattern when it comes to whole numbers. Now, if you see a fraction, I think it's actually easier. This is a positive 5/6. You just make it a negative 6/5. Okay? You don't make both numbers negative. You just put one number. -1, that's the only one that's a little deceitful, right? Because the opposite is a positive 1, but a reciprocal of 1 is just 1. So that one's a little tricky. It just stays, it just switches signs. All right. 0 is also tricky because there's really no opposite reciprocal, but remember, if this means it's a flat line, the opposite in the graphing world is a vertical line, or what we call it undefined. So these two, you might want to put little indicators that they're little tricksters, right? But let's get back to finding regular opposite reciprocals. So this time we have -1/5. So we're going to make that positive, and if we flip this upside down, we can just change it to a 5, just to a 5, because remember, it changes to 5/1. This -1/10, we can make it positive, and it's just going to positive 10. And then we go back to our fractions. If they give us a positive 2/3, we make it the opposite, which is a negative, and put the 3/2. So hopefully you now know what an opposite reciprocal is, because you are going to need that in these examples. And if you hadn't stayed caught up with me, make sure you have this copied down. You can pause the video right now. Hi, and just like in our last lesson with parallel lines, you have to be able to tell if two lines are perpendicular. So hit pause right now and copy down those instructions. Copy down A, B, and these 4 lines. All right, so now that you have this copied down, remember, we are looking at their slopes, right? That's what this whole thing is. And remember, how do we know if it is already in this form? Y equals mx plus b. Y equals mx plus b. Then we know that the number in front of the x is the slope, right? So all we have to do is basically find out if these slopes are what we call opposite reciprocals. So let's take a look. So right here we have these 2 slopes. So we're comparing 3/4 to -4/3. So the question is, all right, so we started off with a positive, all right? So did we get an opposite? Well, this one's negative, so looking so good. And then do we have a reciprocal? Did they flip it? Yep, they put the 4 on top. So this is yes. This is perpendicular lines because these have opposite reciprocals. Okay, not as easy as with parallel that are the same, but not too much more difficult. All right, let's look at B. So on B, we have a -5, which is our slope. You don't have to put the x. And then on the second line, it says -1/5. Well, I already see a problem. Are they opposites? No, that's a -5, that's a -5. So right there, that's going to tell me it is not perpendicular. But it is a little bit tricky because they did use the reciprocal of 5, which is 1/5. But because they didn't do both, it has to be opposite and reciprocal, this is a no. Right? So make sure that you understand why these are not perpendicular. So again, make sure that you have all these notes copied down. Pause if you need to. All right, and just like in our last lesson, you're going to be asked to write an equation of a line that's going through a given point that's perpendicular to a given line. So take a moment, hit the pause button, and make sure you copy down the instructions, copy down our example, and copy down our instruction list. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and label. That's my step 1. So here's my x1, here's my y1, and this is my slope, this 1/2. But here's the one extra step. Is under parallel lines, we just kept it the same. But this time we have to have perpendicular. So I need the opposite reciprocal. So this has one added step of showing me what is the opposite reciprocal. Well, that's a positive, so this is going to be negative. That's a 1/2. If I flip it upside down, it just becomes a 2. So my new slope that I'm going to use for step 2 is -2. So do you see the difference here? This is how we're going to tell that these are perpendicular. So we're moving on to step 2. We're going to go a little bit quicker. So here is my y. Remember, put that minus sign there first, just in case the y1 is minus, but y1 is just 3. Equals, put in my new perpendicular slope, so that's -2, not the 1/2. Put the x and put the minus sign first, and then my x1 is -2. And if you ever see this, okay, if you ever see the minus sign next to a negative sign, you have one extra step, just rewrite it just go y minus 3 equals negative 2x, but only because there's these two negative signs, you can make it a positive 2. If you don't have that problem, then you can just skip that extra step. All right, so now it's plugged in, and now I'm just going to solve for y. So and actually I'm going to distribute. So I'm going to go negative 2 times my x, negative 2 times that. We get y minus 3, negative 2x, and negative 2 times positive 2 is negative 4. And then I'm just going to go add my 3 to both sides. And then I get my y equals negative 2x, and then that makes a minus 1. And that is my answer, right? So, again, label, plug in, and then solve for y, or put it in the y equals mx plus b form. All right, we'll do one more example, and we'll be done. So make sure you hit pause and copy all this down. All right, so here is our example 3. Here's my given point. Here's my given equation. So again, what am I going to do first? I'm going to go through and label x1, y1. This isn't really the slope that I want, so I have to find the opposite reciprocal. So that's a positive 5. So I'm actually going to make this my new slope is going to be a negative number. And that's 5. If you turn that upside down, it becomes negative 1/5. So the slope that I'm going to use is negative 1/5. All right, so step 2, plug it into my equation, right? So I go y minus y1 is negative 4. Oh, I got that double negatives going on. My new slope is negative 1/5. Close parentheses. X minus my x1 is 1, right? So I followed my instructions, and then again over here I don't have that problem, but I don't like this, so I'm going to rewrite this. Y, the minus and the negative, I can make a plus 4 equals negative 1/5 x minus 1. Okay. So you see on this time, this side did not change. All right, so again, same thing. Start solving for y, distribute that. So that becomes negative 1/5 x. And then a negative times a negative becomes a positive. So that becomes a positive 1/5. And I might see a slight little problem later on. We have y plus 4 falls down. And then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go minus 4, put y equals, drop down my negative 1/5x. And then we have this problem. We have to add fractions. But use your calculator. So just type in 1/5 plus negative 4. And you will actually get a negative 9/5. And just be glad you don't have to graph that. But again, our calculator can do that math for us, so that our new perpendicular equation is y equals negative 1/5 x minus 9/5. So that's the end of this lesson. Have a math-tastic day, my excellent students.